Four children, one artistic genius, and the devastating price of loving someone who could paint angels but couldn't be a father. Pablo Picasso created over 50,000 masterpieces, but when it came to his own children, the world's most celebrated artist left behind a legacy of abandonment, secrets, and broken hearts. What happened to the children of the man who revolutionized art but couldn't master the simple act of being present for his own family? Today, we're uncovering the complex, often tragic stories of Picasso's children. Four individuals whose lives were forever shaped by having one of history's most celebrated and controversial artists as their father, yet rarely seeing him as anything more than a distant, mythical figure. Born Paulo Joseph Pierre Picasso on February 4, 1921, to Picasso's first wife, Russian ballerina Olga Koklova, Paulo carried the enormous weight of being the artist's firstborn legitimate child. His early years were spent in the rarefied atmosphere of 1920s Parisian artistic society, where his father was already establishing himself as a revolutionary force in modern art. Paulo's childhood was a strange mixture of privilege and emotional abandonment. While he lived in luxury, surrounded by some of the most famous artists, writers, and intellectuals of the era, his relationship with his father was complicated by Picasso's obsessive devotion to his work and his increasingly volatile temperament. The boy often found himself competing with canvases for his father's attention, a battle he would rarely win. The formative impact of growing up as Picasso's son created deep psychological scars that would follow Paulo throughout his life. He witnessed his parents' marriage deteriorate as his father began his affair with 17-year-old Marie-Thérèse Walter when Paulo was just 6 years old. The household became a battlefield of jealousy, artistic ego, and emotional neglect, with young Paulo caught in the crossfire. Paulo's relationship with his father was marked by a desperate search for approval that would never come. Picasso, consumed by his artistic vision and personal pursuits, viewed fatherhood as an interruption rather than a responsibility. Paulo later recalled feeling like an intruder in my own father's life, a sentiment that would haunt him for decades. When he showed interest in art, Picasso was dismissive, famously telling him, "I have enough painters in the family." The emotional toll of his father's indifference manifested in Paulo's adult struggles with identity and purpose. Unable to follow in his father's artistic footsteps due to constant discouragement and lacking any other clear direction, Paulo drifted through life without the anchor of parental support or guidance. His attempts to establish his own identity were constantly overshadowed by the Picasso name and the expectations that came with it. Paulo's career path reflected his internal confusion and lack of direction. He worked sporadically as a chauffeur and later attempted various business ventures, but nothing provided the fulfillment or success that might have validated his existence in his father's eyes. The irony was profound. He had access to incredible wealth and cultural connections through his father's success, yet felt emotionally impoverished and purposeless. The impact of his mother Olga's mental decline, partly attributed to Picasso's cruel treatment during their marriage, added another layer of trauma to Paulo's experience. He watched his mother suffer from depression and erratic behavior, while his father remained largely absent and unsympathetic. This experience taught Paulo harsh lessons about love, loyalty, and the cost of artistic genius on family relationships. Paulo's personal relationships were inevitably affected by his complicated relationship with his father. His marriages and friendships were strained by his internal struggles and his desperate need for the approval he never received at home. He often spoke about feeling like he was living in his father's shadow while simultaneously being rejected by the very person who cast that shadow. The financial aspects of being Picasso's son created their own set of challenges for Paulo. While he had access to money, he also had to navigate the complex dynamics of his father's relationships with various women and the children from those relationships. The question of inheritance and artistic legacy became a source of ongoing tension and uncertainty. When Picasso died in 1973, Paulo was faced with the monumental task of managing his father's estate while simultaneously processing a lifetime of emotional neglect. The sheer volume of artwork and the complex legal battles that ensued created additional stress during what should have been a time of mourning and reflection. Paulo's later years were marked by increasing struggles with alcohol and depression, He died in 1975, just 2 years after his father, at the age of 54. His death was seen by many as the final casualty of Picasso's emotional negligence. A talented, sensitive man who never recovered from the absence of paternal love and support. Born as Marie de la Concepción Picasso on September 5, 1935, Maya was the daughter of Pablo Picasso and Marie-Thérèse Walter, his young mistress who became pregnant during his marriage to Olga. Maya's very existence was a source of scandal and secrecy, as she was born into a world where her father refused to acknowledge her publicly for many years. Maya's early childhood was spent in a strange liminal space. She was financially supported by one of the world's most famous artists, yet had to keep her relationship to him secret. This created a fundamental split in her identity that would take decades to resolve. She lived with her mother in apartments that Picasso provided, but her father's visits were sporadic and unpredictable. The emotional impact of being Picasso's secret daughter cannot be overstated. Maya grew up knowing she had a famous father who painted her repeatedly. She was the subject of numerous portraits and sculptures, yet she couldn't claim him publicly. This contradiction between artistic immortalization and personal rejection created a complex psychological landscape that Maya had to navigate throughout her formative years. Maya's relationship with her father was intense, but limited. When Picasso did visit, he was completely focused on her, showering her with attention and affection. However, these visits were followed by long periods of absence, creating a pattern of emotional feast and famine that was deeply unsettling for a young child. She learned to treasure these moments while simultaneously resenting their rarity. The impact of her mother Marie-Thérèse's suicide in 1977 was devastating for Maya. Marie-Thérèse had lived her entire adult life in emotional limbo, never fully accepted as Picasso's partner, yet unable to move on from their relationship. Her death by hanging was seen as the final act of a woman destroyed by loving an emotionally unavailable man, and Maya was left to process not only her grief, but also the complex legacy of her parents' relationship. Maya's approach to dealing with her father's legacy was markedly different from her half-brother Paulo. Rather than being crushed by the weight of the Picasso name, she found ways to embrace it while maintaining her own identity. She became deeply involved in managing her father's artistic legacy, working to authenticate works and preserve his artistic heritage. Maya's career as an art expert and administrator of her father's estate gave her a unique perspective on Picasso's work and life. She could see the artistic genius while also understanding the personal cost of that genius on the people around him. This dual perspective made her an invaluable guardian of his legacy, able to appreciate the art while honestly acknowledging its human cost. The challenge of forging her own identity while being so closely associated with her father's work required tremendous strength and wisdom. Maya managed to become a respected figure in the art world in her own right, not just as Picasso's daughter, but as someone with genuine expertise and insight into modern art and its cultural impact. Maya's personal relationships were inevitably affected by her unique position as both an insider and outsider in her father's life. She had to learn to trust others while protecting herself from those who might want to exploit her connection to Picasso. This required developing sophisticated judgment about people's motivations and maintaining careful boundaries. The financial complexity of the Picasso estate meant that Maya had to become highly knowledgeable about art authentication, market valuation, and legal issues surrounding artistic inheritance. This practical education, while challenging, gave her tools to protect both her own interests and the integrity of her father's artistic legacy. Maya's relationship with her half-siblings was complicated by the different circumstances of their births and their varying relationships with their father. She had to navigate family dynamics that were influenced by legal, financial, and emotional factors stemming from Picasso's complex personal life and the massive value of his artistic output. Born Claude Pierre Pablo Picasso on May 15, 1947, Claude was the son of Pablo Picasso and Françoise Gillot, the only woman who ever successfully left the artist, rather than being abandoned by him. This distinction would prove crucial in shaping Claude's character and his approach to dealing with his father's legacy. Claude's early childhood was unique among Picasso's children because his mother Françoise was a strong, independent woman who refused to be destroyed by her relationship with the artist. She was herself a talented painter and intellectual who could match Picasso's intensity while maintaining her own identity. This gave Claude a different model of how to relate to his famous father. The formative experience of watching his mother stand up to Picasso had a profound impact on Claude's development. Unlike his half-siblings, who grew up with mothers who were either crushed by their relationship with Picasso or unable to break free from it, Claude saw that it was possible to love the artist while refusing to be diminished by him. Claude's relationship with his father was characterized by both genuine affection and clear-eyed assessment of Picasso's character flaws. When Françoise finally left Picasso in 1953, taking 6-year-old Claude and his sister Paloma with her, Claude experienced his father's vindictive response firsthand. Picasso cut off all contact and financial support, essentially disowning his children in retaliation for their mother's independence. The emotional impact of this rejection was severe, but Claude's response was different from his half-siblings. Rather than being crushed by his father's abandonment, he was angry, and that anger ultimately became a source of strength rather than destruction. He learned early that his father's love was conditional and selfish, which freed him from spending his life desperately seeking approval that would never come. Claude's approach to his career reflected his determination to succeed on his own terms. He deliberately chose fields that had nothing to do with art, becoming a successful photographer and later moving into other business ventures. His success was achieved independently of his father's reputation, something that gave him a sense of personal validation that his half-siblings never experienced. The legal battles that Claude initiated after his father's death in 1973 demonstrated his fundamentally different approach to dealing with the Picasso legacy. While Paulo was overwhelmed by the estate's complexity and Maya worked within the existing structure, Claude fought aggressively for his legal rights as Picasso's son. Even though he had been disinherited, Claude's persistence in the courts ultimately led to significant changes in French inheritance law and resulted in his recognition as a legitimate heir to his father's estate. This victory was both financial and symbolic. It represented his refusal to accept his father's final act of rejection and his determination to claim his rightful place in the family legacy. The business acumen that Claude developed in managing his portion of the Picasso estate made him a formidable force in the art world. He approached the commercialization of his father's work with the same strategic thinking that made him successful in his own career, ensuring that the Picasso brand remained valuable while maintaining artistic integrity. Claude's relationship with his siblings was complicated by his more confrontational approach to their father's legacy. While Maya worked within the system and Paulo was overwhelmed by it, Claude's willingness to fight in court sometimes put him at odds with other family members who preferred more collaborative approaches. The emotional journey of forgiving his father while simultaneously refusing to excuse his behavior required tremendous psychological sophistication. Claude managed to appreciate Picasso's artistic genius while maintaining clear boundaries about acceptable personal behavior, a balance that served him well in both his business dealings and personal relationships. Claude's role as the family member most willing to speak honestly about Picasso's character flaws has been invaluable in creating a more complete historical record. His willingness to discuss his father's vindictive behavior and emotional cruelty has helped the public understand the full cost of artistic genius and the importance of holding even great artists accountable for their personal behavior. Born Anne Paloma Picasso on April 19, 1949, Paloma was Pablo Picasso's youngest daughter, born to Françoise Gillot during the later years of their relationship. Like her brother Claude, Paloma experienced both her father's love and his vindictive rejection when their mother had the courage to leave him. Paloma's early childhood was spent in the stimulating but volatile atmosphere of her father's household, where artistic creation was constantly happening. But emotional security was always uncertain. She was surrounded by some of the most important cultural figures of the 20th century, yet her most basic need for consistent, reliable parental love was never adequately met. The formative impact of watching her parents' relationship deteriorate and eventually end created lasting impressions on young Paloma. She witnessed her father's charm and charisma, which could make anyone feel like the most important person in the world, but she also saw his capacity for cruelty when that charm was withdrawn. This early education in the complexity of human nature would serve her well in her later career and personal relationships. Paloma's relationship with her father was intense, but brief. When she was just 4 years old, Françoise made the difficult decision to leave Picasso, taking both children with her. Picasso's response was characteristically vindictive. He cut off all contact with his children and refused to provide financial support, effectively disowning them as punishment for their mother's independence. The emotional impact of this rejection was profound, but Paloma's response was similar to her brother's. She channeled her pain into determination rather than despair. The experience of being abandoned by her father taught her early lessons about self-reliance and the importance of creating her own identity separate from his overwhelming presence. Paloma's career choice reflected her desire to create beauty while maintaining complete independence from her father's artistic legacy. She became a successful jewelry designer, establishing her own brand and achieving recognition for her creative vision rather than her famous surname. Her work with Tiffany & Company established her as a significant figure in the luxury goods industry. The decision to work in jewelry design rather than painting or sculpture was deeply meaningful for Paloma. Jewelry represented a form of artistic expression that was completely separate from her father's medium, allowing her to explore her own creativity without inviting comparisons to his work. This choice demonstrated both her artistic instincts and her psychological wisdom. Paloma's approach to design reflected her understanding of beauty, craftsmanship, and commercial appeal. Her jewelry pieces were bold and distinctive, carrying something of her father's artistic DNA while being entirely her own creation. This balance between inheritance and independence became a hallmark of her professional identity. The business success that Paloma achieved in the competitive world of luxury goods proved that her talents extended far beyond her genetic inheritance. She demonstrated strategic thinking, creative vision, and marketing acumen that established her as a formidable businesswoman in her own right, completely separate from her father's reputation. Paloma's personal relationships were inevitably influenced by her early experience of paternal abandonment, but she seemed to learn positive lessons from her mother's strength and independence. Her marriages and friendships reflected her commitment to emotional honesty and mutual respect, qualities that were notably absent from her father's relationships. The legal battles over her father's estate required Paloma to develop sophisticated understanding of intellectual property, artistic authentication, and inheritance law. Like her brother Claude, she fought for her rights as Picasso's daughter, and ultimately secured recognition as a legitimate heir to his artistic and financial legacy. Paloma's role in managing the Picasso estate demonstrated her business acumen and her commitment to preserving her father's artistic legacy while protecting the family's interests. She brought the same attention to detail and strategic thinking to estate management that made her successful in her own career. The emotional journey of reconciling her childhood abandonment with her adult responsibilities as guardian of her father's legacy required tremendous maturity and psychological strength. Paloma managed to separate her personal feelings about Picasso's behavior as a father from her professional obligations to preserve his artistic contributions. Thanks for watching. Click here to check another video and make sure to subscribe to our channel.